On the night of March 14, 2009, a woman named Susan Walsh called a crisis hotline from a payphone in suburban New Jersey and told the operator that she wasn't sure anymore which memories in her head were real. She had a name. She had a job. She had a daughter she loved. But she no longer trusted the sequence of events in her own life. She didn't know which arguments had actually happened, which things she had actually said, which version of herself was the true one. She told the operator she felt like she was dissolving, like the edges of who she was had been slowly erased over 3 years until there was almost nothing left to hold on to. When the case was later reviewed by Dr. Pruman, Ellen Hendrickson at Boston University, what she found was not a woman in mental crisis. What she found was a woman in the final stage of a systematic psychological process, a process with a name, a documented history, a set of tactics so precise they can be mapped and measured. And that is exactly the kind of thing we investigate here at Mind Cage, because understanding it may be one of the most important things you ever do for yourself. By the time you reach the end of what you're about to hear, you will be able to recognize this process before it reaches the stage Susan Walsh reached. You will understand how it begins, why it works, and what specific moments to watch for in your own relationships, not in the abstract, not as a general warning, but as a specific identifiable pattern of behavior that follows the same stages, the same logic, and the same psychological mechanics every single time it appears. This is not information for victims. This is information for anyone who wants to understand how human beings with a particular psychological profile deliberately destroy another person's grip on reality and why they do it on purpose. The process has a clinical name. It is called gaslighting. The word comes from a 1938 play by Patrick Hamilton called Gaslight, in which a husband systematically convinces his wife that she is going insane, dimming the gas-powered lights in their home, and then denying that the lights have changed at all when she notices. The play was adapted into a film twice, most famously in 1944, with Ingrid Bergman in the lead role. But the word itself didn't enter the psychological literature as a clinical concept until the 1990s, and it wasn't widely recognized as a formal tactic of psychological abuse until the early 2000s. What took so long? Partly because the people who use it are extraordinarily good at making it look like something else, and partly because the people it is used on have usually been so thoroughly dismantled by the time anyone looks at them that they seem, on the surface, to be the unstable one. The abuser appears calm. The target appears erratic. The abuser appears rational. The target appears emotional. The abuser appears credible. The target appears unreliable. That inversion is not an accident. It is the intended outcome. To understand why narcissists use gaslighting specifically, not just general manipulation, not just lying, but this particular form of reality distortion, you have to understand what a narcissist is actually defending against, not what they want you to think they're defending, what they're actually protecting. Narcissistic personality disorder, as defined in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, is characterized by a pervasive pattern of grandiosity, a constant need for admiration, and a profound lack of empathy. But those are just the surface features. Underneath them, researchers like Dr. Craig Malkin at Harvard Medical School have documented something more specific. A narcissist's psychological stability is entirely dependent on a fragile internal structure called the false self. This is a constructed identity, built to feel superior, to feel special, to feel beyond criticism. And it sits on top of a deep core of shame so severe that most narcissists cannot access it consciously at all. When that false self is threatened, when someone challenges their version of events, when someone refuses to accept their narrative, when someone remembers something differently, the narcissist does not experience that as a minor disagreement. They experience it as an existential threat. Not consciously in most cases, But neurologically, the brain of a narcissist under perceived threat activates the same fight-or-flight response as someone facing physical danger. And gaslighting is one of the primary weapons of that fight response. Here is the critical thing to understand. Gaslighting is not a random outburst. It is not reactive. It is not impulsive in the way that, say, screaming at someone is impulsive. Gaslighting requires persistence over time. It requires the perpetrator to hold a consistent false narrative across days, weeks, months, sometimes years. It requires them to respond to every challenge with the same deflection, the same counter-accusation, the same calm dismissal. That is not something most people can do consistently unless they genuinely believe their own version of events, or unless they are willing to invest real effort in constructing and maintaining an alternative reality for someone else to inhabit. Both of those things are true of narcissists. Dr. Robin Stern, a psychologist at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, spent 15 years documenting the psychological effects of gaslighting on victims. What she found was that the process was never random. It followed a structure, and within that structure, there were recurring tactics that appeared across case after case regardless of the specific relationship dynamic, whether it was a romantic partner, a parent, a sibling, a boss, or a close friend. The tactics were the same, the outcome was the same, and the reason it worked was the same. The reason it works is love. This is the part that is hardest to accept. Gaslighting works most effectively on people who care about the relationship, people who want to believe the best about the person using it on them, people who have a genuine emotional investment in being wrong rather than right, because being wrong means the relationship can survive. A person who doesn't care about the relationship simply leaves. Gaslighting works on people who stay, and narcissists, with extraordinary precision, select their targets for exactly this quality. Now you need to hear the full story of what this looks like from beginning to end, because it is only in the full arc of it, not in a description of tactics, not in a list of warning signs, but in the lived reality of how it unfolds over time, that you can truly understand how a person ends up like Susan Walsh at a payphone, not knowing which of her own memories are real. The case that has been most extensively documented in the psychological literature, studied by 3 separate research teams, including researchers at the University of Michigan and the Domestic Abuse Research Center in London, involves a woman identified in the published literature only as Claire. Her case was first brought to clinical attention in 2003 when she was referred by her primary care physician to a psychiatrist after presenting with what appeared to be symptoms of a psychotic break. She was disoriented. She was experiencing memory disruption. She was having panic attacks. She had lost a significant amount of weight. She reported that she could no longer trust her own perceptions. She was 31 years old. She had been married to a man named Marcus for 4 years. She had a graduate degree in architecture. Before the relationship with Marcus, she had no psychiatric history. The psychiatrist who evaluated her, Dr. Kurz, Miriam Abloh in Ann Arbor, did not diagnose a psychotic disorder. What she recognized after 3 sessions with Claire and a careful reconstruction of the timeline of her marriage was something that had a completely different origin. And when she began to document that timeline, what emerged was a textbook example of narcissistic gaslighting, so methodical, so precisely executed across 4 years that it has since been used in clinical training programs at multiple institutions. Here is how it began. Claire met Marcus at a professional networking event in Detroit in late 1998. She was 26. He was 34. He was a commercial real estate developer, confident, articulate, socially fluent in a way she later described as magnetic. He was attentive in a way she had never experienced. He remembered small details. He asked questions that made her feel genuinely seen. He called when he said he would call. He arrived when he said he would arrive. He told her within the first 3 weeks of their relationship that she was the most intelligent woman he had ever met, that she understood him in a way no one else had, and that he had been waiting his entire adult life to meet someone like her. This phase is called idealization. It is the first stage of what researchers call the narcissistic relationship cycle, and it is not incidental to what comes later. It is load-bearing, because the idealization phase creates a specific emotional reality in the target that will be exploited relentlessly in every subsequent phase. It creates a comparison point, a version of the relationship and of the narcissist that is extraordinarily beautiful, and that the target will spend years trying to return to. Think about what idealization actually does to the nervous system of the person receiving it. If someone makes you feel more seen, more valued, more understood than you have ever felt in your life, and then that feeling begins to diminish, your first assumption is not that the person was performing. Your first assumption is that you have done something wrong. You have changed. You have failed. You must find out what you did and fix it, and return to that extraordinary feeling you had before. This is not weakness. This is a completely rational response to an experience you believe to be real. The problem is that the experience was a construction. For Claire and Marcus, the idealization phase lasted approximately 8 months. They moved in together after 4 months. She later described this as feeling like the most natural decision she had ever made. He had made the relationship feel so inevitable, so perfectly fitted, that hesitation seemed not just unnecessary, but almost insulting to what they had together. The first crack appeared in what seemed like a small moment. She came home from a work dinner one evening and mentioned that her colleague Daniel had been promoted. Marcus asked if she had congratulated him enthusiastically. She said she had. Marcus went quiet, and then, after a pause, he said something that she remembered clearly. "You always get that tone when you talk about Daniel." She asked what tone he meant. He said she knew what tone. She said she didn't. He said she lit up in a way that she didn't light up for other people, that she had always been a bit too close to Daniel, that he had noticed it many times before but hadn't wanted to say anything. She was confused. She didn't experience what he was describing. She and Daniel were colleagues and friends. There was no romantic history. There had never been anything to be aware of. She told Marcus this. Marcus nodded slowly, in a way that communicated that he believed she believed that, but that he knew something she was not acknowledging. He said he wasn't accusing her of anything. He just found it interesting that she was so defensive. Notice what happened there. The accusation was made. Then it was withdrawn just enough to create deniability. And then her reaction to the accusation was used as evidence against her. She was defensive. Why would she be defensive if there was nothing to defend? This is the opening move of what researchers call the reality substitution phase. And if you have ever been in a relationship where this happened, you know exactly what it feels like, because the feeling is distinctive and profoundly uncomfortable. It is the feeling of knowing something about yourself, and then being made to doubt that knowledge, and then not being sure whether the doubt itself is evidence of your dishonesty. Over the following 6 months, Marcus returned to the subject of Daniel several times. Each time, Claire's denial was treated as confirmation that there was something to deny. Each time, her certainty about her own feelings was gently repositioned as self-deception, and each time Marcus raised it, he added a small detail from a previous conversation that she remembered differently. He would say she had described Daniel as brilliant when she remembered saying he was competent. He would say she had mentioned seeing Daniel for lunch 3 times in 1 week when she could only recall twice. He would say she had texted Daniel in the middle of a conversation between them, which she had absolutely no memory of. Here is the first thing researchers noticed about this pattern. The specific content of what Marcus was doing, accusing her about Daniel, was almost irrelevant. What mattered was the structural effect. Each of these conversations left Claire in a state of mild but persistent doubt about her own memory. And once that doubt was established, once she started to wonder if she really did remember things correctly, it could be deployed on any topic, in any context, at any time. Because here is what happens inside the brain when you are repeatedly told that your memory is unreliable. You begin, quite naturally, to second-check it. You begin to defer to the other person's version of events, not because you believe them necessarily, but because you are no longer confident enough in your own account to assert it without qualification. And the moment that deference becomes a habit, the narcissist has gained something they will use for everything that comes next. They have gained veto power over shared reality. By the end of their first year living together, Claire had begun apologizing for things she didn't fully remember doing. She had begun qualifying her own statements with phrases like, "I think I remember," and "I might be wrong, but..." She had begun looking to Marcus for confirmation of her own experiences before she expressed them. She noticed this at the time. She described it to her sister as feeling like she had become foggy, like something was affecting her concentration. She thought she might be depressed. She considered seeing a doctor. Marcus, when she mentioned this, suggested that she had always been a little emotionally fragile, that he had noticed it from the beginning, had in fact been concerned about it before they got serious, but had decided to invest in the relationship anyway because he believed in her. He said he was glad she was recognizing it herself. He offered to come with her to appointments. This is the move that follows the pattern so consistently it appears in the literature almost as a formula. The target, experiencing the effects of the gaslighting, begins to express concern about their own mental state, and the narcissist responds by confirming the concern, not causing alarm, but gently validating the idea that, yes, there is something wrong with you. Yes, this is something you have always struggled with. Yes, I have been patient with this. And yes, I am still here. This serves two functions simultaneously. It makes the target believe the problem is internal and chronic rather than external and situational. And it positions the narcissist as the loyal, patient partner standing beside a troubled person, which is a social position they will use later when the relationship begins to collapse, and other people need to choose a side. In their second year of marriage, the tactics expanded significantly. This is documented in the case notes as a phase called consolidation, when the gaslighting shifts from isolated incidents to a pervasive, structural feature of daily life. Marcus began disputing events that had concrete external evidence. He told Claire that a dinner with his parents had been her idea when she remembered clearly that he had arranged it. He told her she had agreed to cancel a trip with her friends, when she had no memory of this conversation and could find no record of it. He told her that she had been rude to a colleague at a party, that multiple people had mentioned it to him afterward, when she had no awareness of behaving badly, and none of those people, when she carefully and delicately checked, later had any recollection of what he was describing. He began recruiting external validators, not in an obvious way, not by openly campaigning against her to other people, but by mentioning in social contexts that Claire had been under a lot of stress lately, that she had been forgetting things, that she sometimes reacted in ways that surprised him, and he was never quite sure what to expect. He did this in the tone of a concerned husband, and the people around them absorbed this information and began, quite naturally, to view Claire through that lens, not as a capable, credible adult, but as someone who might be struggling, who might misremember, who might overreact. This is the third thing researchers documented in the pattern: the isolation and external validation phase. Because when the target finally does try to get confirmation of their experiences from people around them, when they say, "Did that happen? Do you remember it that way?" those people have already been primed to doubt them, and the target does not know they have been primed. They simply experience the people around them as also uncertain, also perhaps remembering things differently. And that experience of no one around you confirming your reality is one of the most destabilizing a human being can face. By year 3, Claire had stopped socializing independently, not because Marcus forbade it, but because social events had become painful. She never knew when something she said or did would be brought back to her later as evidence of a problem she hadn't been aware of. She had become hypervigilant, monitoring her own behavior in real time, running a constant internal audit of everything she said and did to try to prevent the next accusation. This hypervigilance was exhausting. It consumed the cognitive resources she had used to be creative, professional, engaged. Her work began to suffer. Her boss noticed. She was passed over for a project she had been expecting to lead. She came home and told Marcus. He said he'd been worried about her performance for a while. He said her boss had mentioned something to him at a function they'd both attended, though he hadn't wanted to raise it because he didn't want to add to her stress. He said perhaps the promotion she was expecting had been a bit optimistic, given where she was right now. This is the moment that a blow identified as the pivot point in Claire's case, the moment when the gaslighting had successfully transferred from specific memories to Claire's fundamental self-concept. She no longer trusted her memory. She no longer trusted her perceptions. She no longer trusted her own professional competence. She no longer trusted her emotional responses. Every domain of her self-knowledge had been successfully placed under question, and the only person whose version of reality she had not yet entirely surrendered to was the person doing this to her. If this kind of deep investigation of the human mind is what you're looking for, subscribing to Mind Cage means you never miss one of these explorations. In the 4th year, something began to shift, but not in the direction anyone who has not studied this phenomenon might expect. Claire did not become more assertive. She did not confront Marcus with a list of examples. She did not suddenly see the pattern clearly and walk out. What happened instead was that she began to deteriorate in ways that were measurable and visible to the people around her. She lost weight. She had difficulty sleeping. She was having what she described as episodes, moments where she could not remember how she had arrived somewhere, or found herself in the middle of a task with no memory of starting it. Her sister began to worry. Her doctor ran tests, and Marcus throughout all of this was present and attentive, accompanying her to appointments, speaking to her physician with what was received as genuine care and concern, describing her symptoms in detail that demonstrated a close, observant partner. He told her doctor, in Claire's presence, that she had always had anxiety, had struggled with stress, had a family history of mental health challenges. Claire, sitting next to him, could not refute any of this clearly, because she was no longer sure which of her own memories to trust. It was Claire's sister, Diane, who eventually broke the pattern. Not with a confrontation, not with research, with a single question. She asked Claire to write down, before they met for coffee one morning, 5 specific memories from the last 2 years, things Claire was certain about. And then Diane compared those memories to her own recollection of the same events. 4 of the 5 memories that Marcus had told Claire were distorted or invented were, in Diane's account, accurate. Claire had remembered them correctly. Diane had been present for several of them. She confirmed Claire's version, not Marcus's. This is what Dr. Abloh later called the clarity event, the moment when the target receives independent external validation that their memory is reliable. The psychological effect was not immediately liberating. Claire's first response was not relief, it was terror, because if she'd been right about those memories, if those things had actually happened the way she remembered, then the alternative explanation for the last 4 years was something she had been actively resisting. The alternative explanation was that the person she loved, the person she had built her life with, the person she had been defending to herself for years, had been systematically and deliberately dismantling her relationship with her own mind. The process of leaving took another 8 months. This is common. and researchers are careful to note that this does not indicate a failure of intelligence or strength on the part of the target. It indicates the depth of the psychological work that has been done on them. The idealization that opened the relationship had created an attachment that was neurologically real. The isolation that had been slowly imposed over 4 years had eliminated most of the external support structures that would have made leaving straightforward. The self-doubt that had been carefully cultivated made every decision feel unreliable, including the decision to leave. And the narcissist, aware that the relationship was becoming unstable, deployed every tool available to them, including a return to idealization, including a period of apparent vulnerability and self-reflection that felt to Claire like the person she had fallen in love with re-emerging. What Claire did not know at the time, and what researchers have since documented extensively, is that this return to idealization at the crisis point of a relationship is not a sign of change. It is a tactic. It is called hoovering, named after the vacuum cleaner brand, because it is a mechanism for sucking the target back into the relationship at the moment they are most likely to leave. It works on the same principle that made the original idealization so effective. It reactivates the hope that the beautiful version of the relationship is real and accessible. It reactivates the attachment, and it buys the narcissist time. Claire eventually left. She moved in with Diane. She began working with Dr. Abloh. The recovery took years. Now here is where the pattern that was present throughout Claire's experience becomes fully visible. Because you need to understand not just what happened to her, but the specific mechanisms that made it possible. Because those mechanisms are operating right now in relationships you may know, perhaps in a relationship you are in. The first pattern that runs through every documented case of narcissistic gaslighting is what researchers call the reliability attack. This is the systematic targeting of the target's confidence in their own perception and memory. It always begins with small disputes, things that are hard to verify, things that exist only in the memory of two people, and it always escalates over time to larger, more consequential claims. The reliability attack works because it exploits a genuine truth about human memory. Memory is not a recording. Memory is a reconstruction. We know this from the work of Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, whose decades of research on false memories demonstrated that human beings can be made to doubt and even abandon accurate memories with surprisingly little external pressure. The narcissist is not inventing a vulnerability. They are weaponizing a real one. What you need to recognize in your own life is the signature feeling of this phase. It is not a feeling of being accused. It is a feeling of mild, persistent confusion about your own mind. It is the experience of regularly leaving a conversation with someone and feeling less sure of what you know than when you entered it. It is the gradual accumulation of small moments where your certainty about your own experience is treated as the suspicious thing rather than the reliable thing. The second pattern is what researchers call the emotional liability transfer. This is the process by which the narcissist displaces their own emotional dysfunction onto the target. Every behavior that is actually a feature of the narcissist psychology, the rage, the instability, the unreliability, the dishonesty, is gradually attributed, through consistent repetition, to the target. You are too sensitive. You are too emotional. You are the one who starts arguments. You are the one with the problem. The target, not knowing what is being done to them, begins to incorporate these characterizations into their self-concept. They become more cautious, more apologetic, more self-monitoring, precisely because they genuinely believe they are the problem. And the narcissist's own behavior, freed from accountability by this transfer, becomes more extreme, more cruel, more brazen. You have encountered the emotional liability transfer in operation when you notice that in a particular relationship, every conflict has somehow become about your reaction to something rather than about the thing itself. When the discussion of what happened is consistently derailed into a discussion of how inappropriately you responded to it. when the substance of your concern is never engaged with directly, but is always reframed as evidence of your instability. The third pattern is the social isolation architecture. This does not usually look like control. It does not usually come with explicit restrictions or commands. It comes through a gradual process of making the target's outside relationships uncomfortable, costly, and unreliable. The narcissist achieves this through multiple routes simultaneously. They may express disappointment or hurt when the target spends time with others. They may generate conflict or household crises that reliably occur at the moments the target has planned time away. They may subtly undermine the target's reputation with the people in their social circle, not with obvious slander, but with the kind of concerned, sympathetic framing that Marcus used with Claire. They may, over time, make the target feel that maintaining outside relationships requires more social and emotional energy than they have, until the target finds that, without ever having been explicitly told to, they have become almost entirely dependent on the narcissist as their primary source of reality confirmation. This is the most dangerous of the patterns, not because it is the most painful in the moment, but because it is the one that makes everything else possible. A target with a robust external network of relationships, people who know them well, who can confirm their memories, who can observe them over time, is difficult to gaslight over the long term. The narcissist's false narrative cannot survive consistent exposure to contradicting reality. The isolation is not incidental to the gaslighting. It is the infrastructure that makes it sustainable. The fourth pattern is what Dr. Stern identified as the confidence cycle. This is perhaps the most subtle of the mechanisms because it mimics genuine support. In the confidence cycle, the narcissist intermittently reinforces the target, praising them, validating them, expressing affection and admiration in a way that is unpredictable and does not correlate with anything specific the target has done. The intermittency is not accidental. Intermittent reinforcement is one of the most powerful behavioral conditioning mechanisms known to psychology. It was documented in detail by B.F. Skinner in his research on reward schedules, and it creates the strongest and most persistent attachment responses, specifically because the reward is unpredictable. The target cannot identify what produces the positive response, so they cannot replicate it consistently. So they remain constantly engaged, constantly trying, constantly oriented toward the person dispensing the reward. This is the mechanism that makes it possible to love someone who is hurting you. It is not confusion. It is neuroscience. What you need to recognize in your own life is whether there is someone whose approval you work for in a way that never produces a reliable result. Someone whose warmth, when it comes, feels extraordinary, specifically because it has been absent. Someone around whom you feel constantly in evaluation, never fully settled, never confident that what you did yesterday will still be valued tomorrow. Now, something most people who study gaslighting never address directly. The question of what the narcissist is actually experiencing when they do this. The answer is important because it changes the nature of what you are dealing with. There is a version of this conversation that frames narcissistic gaslighting as purely predatory, as something done coldly, consciously, with full awareness of the damage being inflicted. And there are certainly cases that match that description. But the majority of documented cases are more complicated, and understanding that complication matters for one very specific reason. It determines what happens when you try to address it directly. Most narcissists, when they gaslight, are genuinely convinced they are right. This is not rationalization in the standard sense. It is a deep structural feature of how the narcissistic mind processes threat. When Marcus told Claire that she had lit up when she talked about Daniel, he was reporting something he had perceived, filtered through a mind whose primary function was to detect and neutralize threats to his false self. The perception was distorted, but it was not invented in the way you might invent a lie. It was the output of a threat detection system set at a sensitivity far beyond normal human calibration. Everything that challenged Marcus's sense of primacy in Claire's life triggered that system. And once the system triggered, the output was experienced not as speculation, but as certainty. This is why gaslighting does not respond to evidence. This is why bringing a list of examples to a narcissist does not produce acknowledgement. The narcissist is not aware of distorting reality. They are aware of defending reality. Their reality, which to them is the only version that exists. Presenting contradicting evidence to a narcissist is not experienced by them as a reasonable challenge. It is experienced as an attack, and an attack triggers the system, and the system produces more gaslighting. This is critical practical information, because it means that the strategy you might naturally reach for, being more articulate, being more persistent, gathering more evidence, finding the right words to make them understand, will not work. Not because you're not smart enough or clear enough, but because you are trying to reach a part of the other person that the gaslighting process does not involve. You are trying to access their reason, but you are dealing with their survival system. There are several specific concrete signals that researchers have identified as reliable early indicators of gaslighting in operation. Things that appear before the full damage is visible, before the isolation is complete, before the reliability attack has progressed to the stage where you are questioning your own sanity. These are not vague intuitions, they are specific observable phenomena. The first is what you might call the selective memory pattern. One person in the relationship consistently has clearer, more detailed, more confident recall of conversations and events than the other. Not occasionally, consistently, and that clarity is consistently deployed in a direction that disadvantages the other person. Their version of events always reflects poorly on you. Their version of events always positions them as the patient, reasonable one, and you as the difficult one. Pay attention to directionality. Random inaccuracy in memory goes in both directions. Selective inaccuracy goes in one. The second is the apology calculation you find yourself doing. You find yourself mentally preparing apologies for things before any conflict has occurred. You find yourself monitoring your own behavior preemptively in the presence of a particular person, trying to reduce the surface area of what might be used against you later. The experience is of living in a low-grade state of vigilance in someone's presence that does not correlate with anything they have done to you in the specific moment. You feel it in your body. The slight tightening, the scanning, the awareness that something you haven't identified yet could be the next thing. That vigilance is not anxiety. That vigilance is your nervous system doing its job. Something has trained it to stay alert. Listen to it. The third is what researchers call the gaslight triangle. This is the configuration in which you regularly find yourself having conversations with third parties, friends, family members, colleagues, who seem to have a slightly different impression of you than you have of yourself. People who seem to expect you to be more volatile, more unreliable, more fragile than your self-knowledge suggests. People who seem subtly surprised when you express a confident opinion, or make a straightforward plan, or handle something competently. This is not them misreading you in isolation. This is the effect of information they have been given by someone who is constructing your reputation for an audience. The fourth signal is the discomfort with certainty that develops in the target. You notice that you no longer say things with the same confidence you used to, that you qualify your memories in conversations where you never used to, that when you hear yourself say something definitive about your own experience, there is a small, intrusive voice that immediately questions whether you're sure. That voice is not your own critical self-reflection. If you can trace its origin to a particular relationship, if you notice it was not there before a particular relationship became significant in your life, that is information. That is the specific weight of someone else's sustained effort to install doubt where your confidence used to be. The fifth signal is more uncomfortable to name, but it is perhaps the most reliable. It is the experience of regularly feeling better, calmer, more like yourself, more confident in your own mind. When a particular person is absent, not just physically absent, but mentally absent, in the sense that they are not present in the conversation or situation you are in. You think more clearly without them. You remember things more easily without them. You feel more competent, more grounded, more real without them. And when they return to your awareness, when they are about to arrive, when you are about to speak to them, when their name appears on your phone, something in you shifts, not toward love or warmth, toward preparation. That preparation is something to pay attention to. Susan Walsh, in her account recorded in the clinical literature, described what recovery felt like in the most specific terms anyone in these documented cases has used. She said it was not a dramatic moment of clarity. It was a slow accumulation of small moments in which she noticed that her thoughts were uninterrupted, in which she came to the end of a memory, and the memory was simply there, complete, without someone else's commentary attached to it. She said it felt like learning to hear silence after living for years in a house with a machine running that she had stopped noticing. The machine stops when the person running it is no longer part of your daily reality. But here is what every clinician who has worked with survivors of gaslighting will tell you. The effects do not stop when the relationship does. The patterns of second-guessing, of deferring, of monitoring, of qualifying your own certainty, these are learned. They were installed into the architecture of how you process your own experience, and they required deliberate, patient, often long work to uninstall. The most important thing to understand about recovery is this. The goal is not to become someone who is never uncertain about their own memory. The goal is to restore the default position. The default position of a psychologically healthy person is that their memory is basically reliable, their perceptions are basically accurate, and disagreement with another person is a dispute between two perspectives rather than evidence of their own malfunction. Gaslighting moves that default position. Recovery is moving it back. For anyone who recognizes something in what you have heard today, a relationship, a pattern, a particular person whose presence in your life produces the specific feelings described here, the first concrete action is also the simplest. Document, not for legal purposes, not for confrontation, but for yourself. Write down what happened in your own words, in your own account, with the specific details you remember before they can be questioned or revised. Do this for your own benefit, because the documented, dated, private account of your own experience is the one thing a sustained gaslighting campaign cannot touch. It is evidence you create for yourself, for the part of you that is going to start doubting you, that the version you remember was real. Do not wait until you are certain something is wrong. Certainty is precisely what the process erodes. Document when you are still relatively sure. Document when you notice the first moments of the confusion. Document when you feel that specific, strange feeling of knowing something and being made to doubt that you know it. The documentation is not for anyone else. It is a fixed point in your own reality that cannot be rewritten later. There is a reason the word cage is in the name of this channel. The cage that the most effective psychological manipulation constructs is not a physical one. It is built from your own doubt, from your own distorted self-knowledge, from the slow, patient work of someone who needed you not to trust yourself. Because as long as you didn't trust yourself, you would keep trusting them. The door to that cage has always opened from the inside. If you have lived through something like what has been described here, or if something about what you have heard today feels familiar in a way that is uncomfortable, what did that recognition feel like? And when did you first notice it?